Okay, so let's get started. All right, so so today's agenda is basically to go through the data pieces of the case study, and essentially, it's also to kind of towards the end, I'd like to talk about the certificate and what that means for the series of classes. So we'll go through that as well. But that being said, let me share my screen. All right. So far, we have been going through the case study. I think all of you know what it is by now. But that being said, just to kind of go and provide a recap, number one, we kind of did a discovery of and steps needed to kick off an effort in terms of discovery. So we went through that. Then we also went through things like building up the use case um, diagram with the use case narrative. We also went through building the requirements documents and how to go about doing that. So just something to keep in mind is the different types of requirements documents. One is you have at high level your business requirements, then you have your SRS documents, which consist of functional, non-functional requirements, and then you can have your stakeholder requirements as well, separate to the SRS. And then the fourth piece of it is the transition requirements, and that's essentially any sort of change requires transition, and so you'll be capturing transition requirements. So today's topic is basically to go over data. Now, the goal of this is not to get too much into the details and the weeds, but really to build your confidence in terms of what is data. What are some common techniques used to do some data analysis? Now, we're not getting into the whole BI side of things, which is the business intelligence side of things, but it's really to give you a touch and go. This is what it means in terms of the data and the flow of data. Agenda for today is really what are some of the data modeling components. Underneath that, you have what's the data flow diagram, what is an entity relationship diagram, and then what do you mean by data mapping and data dictionaries? And we can tie this all up into the case study that we've been working with. So a little bit into the theory, and then we can dive into the case study. From a definition standpoint, I'm not going to read this line by line, but a data model basically makes people understand, well, how is your data going to flow? So in this case study, and I'll jump into it later, we spoke about an online ordering system where a customer goes in, places the order, and then the output of that whole process is basically, you get a payment confirmation as well as, customers get to pick the delivery option. That being said, there's always a flow of data, and the data modeling piece of it explains, well, what would it take to explain or to move the data from the input to the output. So that's kind of the data modeling piece of it. It's behind the scenes, but it is an important component. Part of data modeling, you kind of build a very high level data flow diagram. So once again, I'm providing the definition. I'm not going to go through it line by line, but it's really how do you dummy it down so that your stakeholders, maybe not so much your customers, but your testers and your developers understand, well, how does the data flow from the input to the output? And I'll kind of show you how to draw that out. Now, different BAs have different methods of drawing it out. I typically use kind of like a dummied down version of a context diagram to build that, to keep it very simple. And it doesn't really, you shouldn't be getting too much into the weeds of how the architects would build it, but it's more so for your understanding and for your immediate stakeholders to understand how the data is flowing. The third piece of it is the relationship diagram. It basically kind of goes over, well, so think of now you've built your data flow diagram. If you guys are not familiar with databases, or if you are, databases are basically hold the data. Okay, think of a big Excel spreadsheet. So the Excel spreadsheet, in this case, could be a database. And in this case, it could hold information tying back to the case study, is data from the customer, data from as far as the menu is concerned, as far as the orders. So think of an Excel spreadsheet as a database. And within that database, you can have different tabs in your Excel spreadsheet, and those tabs could represent tables. So just keep that comparison in mind, and I'll show you how the ERDs look. So let's go through a little bit of definitions in terms of ERDs. And once again, don't get too flustered about the terminology. Just as I've said before, listen, and then just go back to the recordings or go back and do your own research, and kind of it'll come together for you. Right now, just kind of going through the definitions. An entity in the entity relationship diagram could be anything like things, people, places, and they're basically a group of data elements, and you kind of categorize, and that category is your entity. As an example, customer, right? So anything like customer, first name, last name, phone number would all fall under the entity of a customer. That being said, entity kind of equals a noun, which just keep that relationship in mind in terms of grammar. Relationship. Now, each, as an example, there's that Excel spreadsheet example that I gave you. Within the Excel spreadsheet, you could have different tabs, right? One tab could be that of a customer. That one tab represents a entity, aka a table. The second tab could be order details, right? So that is another table. So how do you connect customers to the order? And that's through building your relationship. The relationship basically equals verbs. Think of it grammatically that way. An example could be enrolls. This is a different case study, right? So a student and a class. So student is one table, class is another table. So the relationship between the student table and the class table is student enrolls in a class. That enrolls is that relationship. An attribute, very simple, it just equals the data element. In this example, back to the case study, you could have customer as an entity. Underneath that, you could have customer name, customer phone number. The customer name and the phone number are basically your data elements, which is your attribute, right? So that is equal to an adjective. An attribute could also be new student. It could also be customer first name of customer, something like that. So just think about attribute as your data element. Cardinality, you'll hear that term. Is basically the type of relationship that exists between two tables. There could be a one-to-many relationship. There could be a one-to-one relationship. There could be many-to-many. So just think of the type of relationship as being cardinality. If you ever asked in an interview, at least you have the definition down, so you can kind of reference those. As an example, cardinality can be if one entity is customer, your next entity is order, and then your basically the adjective here is places. What's the relationship, right? So you can have one customer that can place many orders, in this case N, and then one represents the one customer. The other way of looking at it is how many orders, um, how many orders can one customer place? In this case, it's 10. So it's really, you look at it from the customer angle as well as the order angle, and you can kind of reverse it. So I'll kind of talk through the application of it in a little bit, but just from a conceptual, theoretical perspective, just kind of wanted to show you the essential pieces that you need to be aware of. Moving on from the entity relationship diagrams, your data dictionary, and your data mapping. So I'm going to group these together. Data dictionaries basically consists of your metadata, meaning your data about the data information. So think of, in this case, we're building out a new database because this has never existed before. So now is a good time, it would be a good time to set up a data dictionary, which is a central repository or storage area of information around the data. Many times I've seen that grouped with data mapping documents as we're creating the product, so that's why I'm using it interchangeably. There's a debate in the industry around keeping it separate versus grouping it together. But in some instances, in my case, I'm giving you an example, and I will be giving you an example where I've combined the two together. Data mapping basically consists of the things in the data dictionary, as well as does like an end-to-end flow of what's your source, what's your target, and what does that flow look like in between? Are there any business rules that need to be applied? So that's basically what data mapping is all about. So moving on to the case study, before I do, just opening up, do you guys have any questions? Okay. So in our case study, right, so I'm assuming with the BA has gone in and looked at the wireframes that we went through last week, looked through the requirements, and is able to pull out a couple of data elements. And in our case, there's a huge big dump of data that this BA has kind of put together. So the question is, what are the types of data that need to be included on the online ordering system? So based on research and some analysis, they said, okay, we want the name, the first and last name of the customer, the customer ID. So we want a ID. So in this case, actually, it might be better to call it customer ID. Password. So each customer will have their own password. New user ID. In the event that there's a new user, they want the ability to put in a new user ID. New password. New verification password. So in many instances, if you see UIs, you have the verification password field. Once again, this is an initial analysis. In some instances, you may not need to separate these fields out, but this is just an initial brainstorm dump of the data elements. An address field is needed of the customer. Delivery address could be different than the customer's address. The address on the card of the card. There's order ID, order description, menu item, menu ID. So each menu could have a unique identifier, price of the item, type. So we get into payment method, credit card, 9 digits, last 3, credit card expiration date, credit card company, PayPal token key. In our case, if we connect it to PayPal. Delivery method, they could be 2, right? So they could be pickup, or they could be delivery, I mean actual using DoorDash. Delivery ID, unique ID, report title, report sales total. So once again, there was a requirement to generate reports. So in this case, those are kinds of fields that the owner or the stakeholders may want to see. So that's just an initial dump of the data, right? So that's your starting point, and that's derived from the requirement. Your next step is now let's group these data elements together. So you're trying to affinitize those data elements into common themes, right? So in your themes that are coming out of this analysis is customer, you'll have menu, payment, delivery, report. So those are your basic themes. In our case, those are nouns which equal your entities. So think of it that way, building that up slowly. In the customer, we've grouped together the customer fields that are needed. In the menu, you've grouped it together, so on and so forth. So really, you've taken it to that next level of analysis and gotten the themes together. So let me switch over to Lucid Chart. And actually, let's start with an exercise together. So we have the fields, but really at this point, I don't have a sense as to how the data should flow. So I'm using Lucid Charts here. Can you guys see the Lucid Chart screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So in our case, what I'm going to do is create a context diagram for the data flow, not necessarily the best way of doing it, but for me, I just need to understand the flow at this point, right? I'm saying not the best way because there's the right ways of doing it, but in my case, I want to make sure I understand it before I can align with my devs and testers. So in this case, let's pull up that circle. Let's pull up the database, which is right here. And let's pull up these arrows. This is data coming from someplace, and then there's data that will go back. So when we say databases, once again, you could have anything from Excel, where the data is stored, to things like MySQL, to an Oracle database. But this is kind of like a small size effort for websites. So for me, it doesn't matter the type of database. I just want to visually see, okay, that this is a database. So in this case, the data is going to flow from, can you tell me, data is going to flow from the online ordering system. And then let's put some square here. Okay, so the UI in this case is the user interface where the customers are entering information. So in this case, user can enter their customer information. We're just going to group this up. They could enter select the menu. Oops. Doesn't look pretty, but and let me do one at a time. Hold on. So for some reason I can't. But anyway, so what you will do is on the high over here, you're going to say, okay, these are the types of data elements that I'm going to put through the online ordering system. The online ordering system is going to send following data to the database. This is what was expected to come back. Now, you're going to leave it at a high level, not so much into the level of detail around the fields, but keep it at an entity level. I would say also that there could be transformation rules. So this high-level diagram will give you a visual representation of how the data is going to flow back and forth. Not getting into the details is just going to be very simple. Sometimes this diagram, once you start doing this, if you work in a big corporate environment, there could be a lot of dependencies. So this diagram could just blow up in terms of increasing the number of interfaces, systems interacting with each other. So this is a very, very simplistic view of how things are represented in a data flow diagram. Now, let's go to the entity relationship diagram. I'm going to go back to this lucid chart. And they already have pre-built templates for ERDs, class diagrams, things of that sort. But most of them are actually premium. So I just use what you think is free and available. Now, the entity relationship diagram, there's many different notations. And the more you read about it, the more it gets confusing because each, there's different techniques to represent the data. And so there's no right way to do it, but as long as you can understand what this means, and as long as you can understand and explain what these items mean, that's all that matters. So in this case, this is kind of an ERD, which looks very similar, and you'll hear this also in the industry, is class diagrams, right? So if you're ever asked the difference between, what's the difference between an ERD versus a class diagram, an ERD basically goes over the entities and their relationships with each other, and attributes provides that. Versus a class diagram, a lot of software developers use as well as data modelers that really work on setting up the database. A class diagram basically explains the behaviors or the methods that are used to build this big database. So once again, from a BA perspective, get familiar with at a high level what a class diagram is, and also at a high level what an ERD is. I don't expect you to get too much into the weeds in terms of what those elements are or what those are at this point. So just so you get an idea of an ERD, in our case, the online ordering system, there's many different ways of dicing and slicing it, but really a customer will have a customer ID, a password, which will be encrypted, customer name, and customer telephone number. So if you notice, the attributes, the entity is here in this first top corner, and then over here at the bottom you have your attributes, in this case customer ID, and the attribute, basically the type, right? So in this case it's an integer. So in software, you guys are probably familiar, you have the integer, you can have a data element that's varchar, it could be completely numeric. So you define those in this entity relationship diagram. You'll also notice there's pluses and hashtags and minuses here. If you read a little bit more about it, it basically means that a customer ID can be public, meaning any one of these boxes here, any one of these tables can access the customer ID. A password hashtag would be protected, meaning only this class, only this entity can access this data, nothing else, nothing outside of that. So not too much into the weeds, just touch and go. You list the attributes here, and you list your types, what those attribute types are in terms of numeric versus integer over here. Now, you put the customer, you have another delivery box here, and underneath that you have your entity, your attributes. So you keep going on here, and if you notice over here at the bottom, there's separate entities for pickup and DoorDash, meaning delivery with the DoorDash. There could be an extension of that class or that entity here. But in this case, under delivery, you can have two separate subclasses that tie to delivery. And you kind of get a view of, okay, this is how things flow in terms of the data. I have not put in the relationship here in terms of one to many or many to many, but that's something you could do at a later point. But for my purposes, it depends upon what the developers are doing. Developers could also do this exercise, right? So for my purposes, I just wanted to touch and go, make sure I understand the relationships in the tables and how these are set up, and then go from there. Order, there's a menu, payment, and within payment, you can have credit card and cash, and those have their own separate attributes, okay? The purpose of doing this is to assist your developers in potentially helping them out in terms of building out the database. This is typically built by a business systems analyst, which is different from a business analyst role. Business systems analysts get more into like SQLing, running queries through the database, assisting with the database setup. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys understand that there's a difference between the two roles and what's needed. So that being said, I'm going to pause here, see if you guys have any questions or comments. Okay. So in order to build an entity relationship diagram, you identify fields, you group fields, you draw the tables, you establish relationships between tables, and you determine the attributes. So those are kind of the 5 steps to keep in mind when you're building that diagram. The next part of it is my favorite, because now you're building a data dictionary / data mapping document. We're combining these 2 documents. So what I have is a template here.
Rashmi, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Can we go back to the presentation where you were? I just wanted to understand the entity relationship diagram and data mapping, data modeling. Is this like a role of a BA? Is this like, or just from understanding perspective, that what does that mean? Because this is more of you work with a data modeler or a data mapper, right, to do this, not like as a BA you're doing these.
Some BAs do this. To be honest with you, some BAs actually, so I wouldn't say like people that work with business process mapping, right, do this. This is system analysts do data mapping, and depends on the organization, right? So if you do have data modelers, yes, they will go ahead and do the class diagrams. They'll create the entity relationship diagram. But in some instances, like a smaller company, they may not have data modelers. That's when systems analysts step in to do these kinds of activities as well.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah, and yeah, it depends upon the size of the company and what you've been tasked for in terms of when you're hired. Okay. A good question. Yep.
Got it.
So now the data mapping. So the data mapping piece of it is the basic idea behind data mapping is source to target, right? So we kind of, let's see, go back to Lucid. We built our data flow diagram here, right? So your source is your UI and your target is your database. So just remember source and target. So when you go to build a data mapping document, you're really saying, okay, what's the name of the field in the source, aka the UI in this case, and what's the target database field name. And so because this is new, there's opportunity. There may not be much of a difference. There could be some instances developers or architects follow specific naming conventions and how to set up names in the database. As an example, you don't need to worry about this, but they use what they call the camel case, meaning if for instance, we have first name in the source, aka the UI, and that's how it's labeled. In the database, the architect may say, no, well, it should be like this, right? Small f, you combine it, big N over here. So I may not make a big difference, but from a developer coding perspective, when they're doing the end-to-end mapping, it could be a big difference. So it's just something to keep in mind, that that's the reason kind of why we do this exercise. In our case, we have the data name as order ID. Data description really provides, well, what do you mean by order ID? Why are we using it? So that's where the data dictionary piece comes into place. You're providing the description of what that field is about over here. As an example, menu description, you could say this will provide the menu, the information around the menu and what the ingredients are. So you can be that specific. The next column here is format in the UI. So let's see, order ID in the UI could be, I'm making this up, it could be starts with 1 and then could go, actually let's do example, right? This is just one example. 1, 1. Okay, and then the next example could be 1, 2. So format in the UI, and this may not even show up in the UI, right? So order ID could be more for back end. Once an order is placed, the system generates the order ID and then sends that over to the database. So this may not even be in the UI. Source UI, data name. As I said, this may not be in the UI, so this will be NA. And actually, this won't be right. This is, and then we will put format in the database. It would be the same thing. We want to keep it the way it is. Target database data. Actually, this should be name. And in this case, if the architects come back and say, and if you don't even have an architect, that's a different issue, but you would just follow the camel case and just leave it at this. Okay. Table name. As an example, you would say order as your table name. Derived. Is it derived? What do we mean by derived? Meaning, do we need to calculate? Does the system need to do any sort of behind-the-scenes transformation or calculation? So in my case, this is interesting, right? Because the UI is not going to provide or create the order ID. The system will, right? So in this case, the derived piece of it would be yes, because the system will generate the order ID, and transformation rules in this case will be system generated order ID. I just want to give you an example of the flow. And once you get into this, it gets a lot easier, and it's a lot of fun, because really you're just making sure that there's an end-to-end clarity from source to target. Customer name. Let's do one more. Data description. This will hold the first and last name of the customer. Okay. Format. Example. John Smith. Okay. Source UI data name. So this could be on the UI. What is it going to be called? Could be just name. Format in the database example, it'll be the same format. We're not tweaking anything. We're just passing that data. And name in the database, in this case, just maybe say customer name. Okay, and then table name would be customer. Is it derived? No, because it's going to be straight pass through. And transformation rules, not applicable, because they're not transforming anything. So just like that, you kind of go item by item. Now, if you work for a bigger company and there's a lot of interfaces, this can be a huge, huge document, right? So the key piece of this, I would say, is alignment with your developers. Make sure they understand the template. as well as your testers. Now, in this case, the owner of your restaurant or your stakeholders, like the finance managers, operations, or even the staff, don't really care about this document because they won't understand this. This is more for back end piece of it. I think it was it Amanpreet? Whoever you guys brought it up that is this really the role of the BA? Some instances, depending upon the size of the company, it could end up being the role of the BA. Bigger companies, they do have data modelers, but even though they may have data modelers, you're kind of the keeper of the information. So it's good for you to understand what a data mapping document is, as well as an enterprise entity relationship diagram is from a high level, just so you understand what they're doing. Because ultimately, as I said, you're the keeper of the information. You're the one relaying the information back to your stakeholders, aka in this case the owner. So you need to be able to talk about, well, this is what's in the database, and be able to translate that in layman's terms to your stakeholders. So I'm going to pause here, see if there's any questions. Okay. So in order to build a data mapping data dictionary document, step 1, determine the source field names on the UI. Step 2, determine the target field names in the database. 3 is establish transformation rules. 4 is identify formatting rules. And 5 is determine the definitions of the data element. So that's kind of an overview of data. Like I said, don't get overwhelmed. This is touch and go in terms of data. You kind of need to understand, well, what is this? Why are we doing this? And what this means, and use that so you can speak to the data if the stakeholders asked, and you're able to make sense of the design. That being said, that was it for today's class, but before I switch over to certification, does anyone have any questions? Okay. So that being said, from a certification standpoint, I know there's been this class is probably we're going to have 5 or 6 more classes, and we'll be covering next week. We'll be covering an important piece, meaning the elicitation. I mean, how to go about getting information from your customers, right? That's using your soft skills to do that, as well as facilitating meetings. So that's the next week's agenda item. Also, as part of this series, I'll be covering Agile, SDLC, what those two methodologies are. I'll also be covering a little more in Agile because that's what's being used in the industry now, how to build user stories, tools such as Jira, how to use those. The other piece of it is also I'd like to go over SQL because that I'm seeing a trend in terms of people are hiring folks that know SQL. So that's something I'd like to give you the basics in terms of what I mean. The other pieces of it are the common interview questions, as well as preparing you guys for the interviews, as well as the resume reviews. If you would like to send me your resumes ahead of time, I'd be more than happy to review those resumes, provide feedback. But those are the remaining components that are left before we end. But at the end of it, I would like to give you guys a short quiz and give you, if you pass, give you that certificate. So you guys can use that, wherever you go in terms of, hey, I did go through this class. But that'll be the end. It won't be a tough quiz, I promise. It'll just be making sure that you guys understand the different pieces that we went through and are able to confidently interview for or just transition into whatever VA role that you're going through. So that being said, questions or comments?
Rashmi, I want to find out, is there a particular particular institute for certification that you recommend? And I
Yeah.
definitely want to get a review on like a PMI BA certification. What do you think about that?
So I think both are good. There's two when I say both. There's the PMI PBA certification, and then there's the CBAP from IIB. However, IIB also has an ECBA and I believe CCBA certifications, which ECBA are the entry level. So if you are entering into the market, ECBA is a good starting point. PMI PBA will give you the whole. It's just overwhelming. I think ECBA is a manageable chunk if you're entry level. Personally, CBAP is looked upon more so from in the industry, more so from um, they're very well known. They're
Are you
they're
talking about
you know the,
PMI PBA, right?
no IIBA CBAP,
IBA. Okay. Okay.
yeah, ECBA. PMI PBA came. PMI started a PBA, a business analysis certification, late in the game.
Okay.
They're very project oriented. So if you look at their structure of coursework, it's very like within the project life cycle.
Mhm.
Versus the CBAP, ECBA looks at it more from a product perspective. So those are two distinguishing factors. Not to say either one's good, but
Mhm.
it all depends upon A, your years of experience, B, where you want to be. So CBAP also kind of helps if you want to do strategy or strategic analysis, enterprise analysis.
Mhm.
It's recognized there as well. PMIPB, as I said, is very project centric. Doesn't get into the enterprise piece of things. So
Okay.
those are kind of the differences. I
Okay. Mhm.
it takes a lot of time and effort to go through those, studying those materials. So it depends upon what your goals are. Both of them are difficult, to be honest with you. They're not easy, but I would say
Okay.
ECBA could be a better bet in terms of the quick kind of getting through it.
Rashmi, when you don't, I don't want to take time away from other folks here, but whenever you can, would you talk a little bit about a growth chart for a BA? Like, what are the next steps as a BA you can take? Can you go into project management? Can you go into agile management? Can you be a scrum master? Just getting a
Yeah,
little bit of like, okay, if like I'm starting from data analysis to BA analysis, and wanted to
yeah,
just say what is a growth path for this career.
yeah. So I wrote an article on hybrid BA roles, but that's just the hybrid BA roles, but that'll give you an idea of the branches that you can branch off of. Um, there's two ways of looking at it. One is you can be very project centric, aka move into being a scrum master, being a project manager, if that's what you like doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you could end up being a tester, QA, if that's what you like doing. You could end up being a delivery lead, right? So Capital One has a model where they have agile, but they also have delivery leads that are responsible for end-to-end delivery. That's the stress levels in those environments are high, right? So it depends upon what you want, but that's an option, right? You could get more into the project world. The enterprise level, there's opportunities there as well. I've seen people get into strategy. I've also seen people get into being either solution architect and then kind of go into EA work. I've also seen people become back to the project world. It's the product managers, that role where you're solely responsible for making sure that the product is delivered with quality. That's your responsibility. Um, there's a lot of opportunities, but the core of being a BA is you, and I'm saying this from experience, is you have the skill set of digging through information and making sense of things and presenting it in a certain way. You can take that skill set anywhere. Um, you can be a VP. I've seen people march up to the ranks of being VPs in companies. So it just depends upon where you are in life and what you want.
Thanks,
Or like
Rashmi.
me, yeah, like me, you could end up wanting to do more consulting work or just training, right? So it all
Mm-hmm.
depends.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So as I said, I'm starting off the resume services on my site. I'm not charging anything for this set of folks. If you guys want to send me your resumes, I can review it and then provide feedback. And if you kind of want to start thinking about gearing up for interviews as well, just let me know. We'll be touching upon the class, but if you want to get ahead of it, just let me know.
Rashmi, I had a question.
Yeah.
Like online at many websites, I had read that it's kind of a mixed opinion that ECBA is like very important for getting a job, and some people say that ECBA, I mean, is just waste of time. So I just wanted to know how important is ECBA for getting a job in the market.
If I were a manager and I'm specifically hiring for a BA that doesn't have the experience, like a junior BA, if I see a resume that comes across as ECBA and you kind of specify what that means, I would pick that person. Because that shows that you're serious about building that skill set. Now, is it required? No. But if you want to stand apart from other folks, I would say go ahead and read. Keep in mind the business IABA, the Baybalk guide is very dry, very dry. So
Yeah.
it's like to the point where I ended up putting my book down because I couldn't take it. So, but it does give you, once you understand it, it does give you I would say the knowledge, not necessarily the tangible skills, but the knowledge of what's needed. But as I said, if you are serious, you know, go ahead and take it. But if you don't have the time, right? That's the other piece of it. If you don't have the time and are eager to start job searching, just try it out without the ECBA. See what kind of response you get. I would say that as well. But as I said, if I'm a manager, I'd probably say, hey, ECBA, interesting, person serious.
Okay. And how much time does it take to prepare for ECBA exam? Sorry.
So people claim, I mean, if you go through other Adaptive US and all those folks, they claim you can get it done in 3 months. But that's making sure your head's down and making sure you're doing all the tasks. But that's for ECBA though. For CBAP, it does take longer. The questions are harder.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the BEBOG is only one source from where we can prepare for ECB, or is there any other books or anything, resource material from where we can refer?
Oh yeah, there's others. I don't think you could pass the ECB with just the BEBOG. There's Watermark Learning. I don't know if you've seen their site. They have they've been in the business for many years. They have a good training program.
What website is that?
It's called Watermark. Let me put that in the chat if I can. Watermark Learning, WATERMARK. And so they have all these classes, plus they have books. And I have their book that I'm reading through right now. They're not bad. I mean, they're pretty good. And then they have the question bank, which a lot of people go and use, but they sell that separately.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. You guys are already thinking about the certification.
Yeah, because like I tried for reading BEBOG, but it's like going above my head. So I just asked.
Yeah, no, it's tough. I mean, that one is really tough. So that's why sometimes it might be better to just look at just a class, to just attend in one shot and just get it over with. But yeah, it is very dry. PMI PBA, on the other hand, if you read their book, I think there's very project centric, so it's easier to understand. But once again, it's a lot of information. Definitely a lot.
Okay.
Awesome, ladies. How's your case study? Did you guys do anything with your case studies or anything on your end?
I'm planning to start with it this week.
Okay.
And on my end, I have not got chance to go through that, Rashmi. So
Yeah, no worries.
it's like,
Same here.
How about you, Lalita? I think you were just following the case study, right, that we're doing?
Yes, the same one. Yes.
Okay,
I didn't get a chance to work on it this week at all.
cool. So for next week, I'll put together, it'll be more like a scripting thing because we're going to go through eliciting requirements. And you can kind of refer to that when you get into the real world because eliciting requirements are important. So we'll go through that next week. All right. Well, if there's nothing, we will chat next week and have a good week.
You too,
all right.
Rashmi.
Thanks, Rashmi.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.